One of the biggest reasons avoidants are so hard to get over has very little to do with love itself and everything to do with the way the human brain responds to uncertainty. Most people assume that they struggle to move on because the relationship was exceptionally deep, uniquely meaningful, or impossible to replace. But when we look beneath the surface, we often discover something much more complicated. What keeps people emotionally attached is not always what they received from the relationship. It is often what they were continually hoping to receive, but never fully got meant. Think about the dynamic that commonly develops with an avoidant partner. In the beginning, they may appear incredibly present. They show interest, create emotional intimacy, and make you feel seen in ways that are deeply meaningful. For a moment, it feels as though the connection is growing naturally. Then something changes. As the relationship becomes more serious, they begin to pull back. Communication becomes inconsistent. Affection becomes unpredictable. The closeness that once felt effortless suddenly feels conditional. This creates a psychological pattern that is far more powerful than most people realize. Human beings are wired to seek consistency. We thrive when we know where we stand. But when affection becomes unpredictable, the brain enters a heightened state of attention. Instead of relaxing into the relationship, it becomes focused on solving a mystery. Why are they distant? What changed? What can I do differently? How do I get back to the connection we once had? The relationship stops being something you experience and starts becoming something you chase. Psychologists have long understood that intermittent reinforcement is one of the strongest conditioning forces in human behavior. When rewards are unpredictable, people often become more attached, not less. This principle explains everything from gambling addiction to compulsive behaviors. The uncertainty itself creates obsession. The same thing can happen in relationships. When an avoidant partner alternates between connection and withdrawal, your emotional system becomes trained to anticipate the next moment of closeness. Every text message feels significant. Every small gesture feels meaningful. Every sign of affection carries enormous emotional weight because it arrives after a period of lieu. The irony is that the less consistently available they become, the more valuable their attention appears. Many people mistakenly interpret this heightened emotional intensity as proof of profound love. They think, I can't stop thinking about them, so they must have been my soulmate. But intensity and health are not the same thing. Obsession and connection are not the same thing. Emotional activation and genuine intimacy are not the same thing. What often feels like love is actually the nervous system responding to unpredictability. This is why people frequently find themselves unable to move on, even when they can clearly identify the problems in the relationship. Logically, they understand that their needs were not being met. They understand that communication was inconsistent. They understand that they often felt anxious, confused, or emotionally deprived. Yet emotionally, they remain attached. The attachment persists because the brain is still searching for resolution. There is also a deeper philosophical dimension to this experience. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We naturally seek completion. When something feels unfinished, we continue to revisit it mentally. We replay conversations. We imagine alternative outcomes. We search for hidden explanations. We convince ourselves that one more conversation, one more chance, or one more breakthrough will finally provide the closure we seek. Avoidant relationships often leave people trapped in this state because there is rarely a clean ending. Instead of receiving clear explanations, they encounter ambiguity. Instead of certainty, they receive mixed signals. Instead of closure, they receive silence. And the mind hates unfinished stories. The challenge, then, is recognizing that the thing you are attached to may not actually be the person. It may be the cycle itself. It may be the hope of finally receiving the consistency that was always missing. It may be the desire to complete a story that never truly reached its conclusion. Healing begins when you stop interpreting the pursuit as evidence of love and start seeing it as evidence of loss. The moment you understand that your attachment has been strengthened by inconsistency rather than intimacy, you begin to reclaim your freedom. You stop asking why they were so difficult to forget and start asking why unpredictability became so powerful in your life. And that question changes everything. The greatest breakthrough comes when you realize that what you miss most may not be the person. It may be the promise that one day they would finally become who you needed them to be. Once we understand how the cycle of emotional availability and withdrawal creates powerful attachment, we can begin to see why rejection from an avoidant partner feels so uniquely painful. For many people, the end of the relationship is not experienced as a simple loss. It feels like a verdict. It feels as though someone has examined their value, measured their worth, and decided they were not enough woog. This is where the emotional damage often deepens. When an avoidant partner begins to distance themselves, most people do not immediately recognize it as an attachment strategy. They interpret it personally. They assume the withdrawal must mean something about them. If their partner stops communicating as often, they wonder what they did wrong. If affection decreases, they question whether they have become less attractive, less interesting, or less lovable. If commitment becomes difficult, they assume they have somehow failed the two. The human mind is constantly searching for explanations. When we do not have clear answers, we tend to create our own. Unfortunately, those explanations are often self-critical. An avoidant partner may pull away because intimacy activates feelings of vulnerability they have spent years trying to avoid. They may become uncomfortable when emotional dependence begins to grow. They may feel trapped by expectations that most secure individuals would consider normal. Yet the person on the receiving end rarely sees this internal struggle. All they see is distance, and distance naturally feels like rejection. The deeper problem is that rejection does not simply affect the present moment. It often awakens emotional memories from the past. Every human being carries a psychological history. We all have experiences that shaped our understanding of love, belonging, and acceptance. For some people, an avoidant partner unknowingly touches old wounds that existed long before the relationship began. Perhaps there were moments in childhood when affection felt conditional. Perhaps approval had to be earned through achievement. Perhaps emotional needs were ignored or minimized. These experiences create beliefs that often remain hidden beneath conscious awareness. Beliefs such as, I am not enough. I have to work for love. If someone leaves, it means something is wrong with me. When an avoidant partner withdraws, these beliefs suddenly come alive. The breakup becomes about much more than the relationship itself. It becomes a confirmation of fears that have existed for years. This is why people often become obsessed with understanding why the avoidant left. They believe that if they can find the perfect explanation, they can finally feel better. But what they are really searching for is reassurance about their own worth. They are trying to answer a question that has haunted them long before the relationship began. Am I enough? The tragedy is that no answer from another person can permanently resolve that question. Even if the avoidant returned tomorrow and said all the right things, the relief would likely be temporary. Why? Because the real issue is not their opinion. The real issue is the meaning that has been attached to their behavior. This is one of the most important distinctions in healing. An avoidance withdrawal is often a reflection of their relationship with intimacy, not a reflection of your value as a human being. Think about that carefully. People with avoidant attachment patterns tend to struggle with closeness across multiple relationships. The discomfort does not suddenly appear because of one specific partner. It is part of a larger emotional framework they developed over time. Their distancing behavior existed before you entered their life, and in many cases, it continues long after you leave. Yet when we are emotionally invested, we make ourselves the center of the story. We assume their behavior must be a direct commentary on our worth. That assumption creates suffering. Philosophically, this is one of the great challenges of human existence. We often confuse another person's capacity to love with our deservingness of love. We mistake their limitations for evidence of our inadequacy. But another person's inability to meet your emotional needs does not diminish your value. Another person's sphere of intimacy does not make you unworthy of connection. Another person's withdrawal does not define your significance. Healing begins when you stop asking, why wasn't I enough for them? And start asking, why did I allow their behavior to become the measure of my worth? Because the fear and truth is that your value was never on trial. The relationship ended, the connection changed, and the person pulled away, but your worth remained untouched. Wait. The moment you stop treating their rejection as a judgment of who you are, you begin to see what was true all along. Their distance was a reflection of their wounds, not proof of yours. As we move deeper into understanding why avoidants are so difficult to get over, we arrive at a truth that many people resist confronting. Often, they are not grieving the relationship that actually existed. They are grieving the relationship they believed could exist. They are mourning a future they imagined, a version of the person they hoped would eventually emerge, and a love story that remained permanently unfinished. This is where the concept of the fantasy bond becomes so important. Many relationships with avoidant individuals begin with genuine promise. There are moments of connection, chemistry, vulnerability, and closeness that feel incredibly real. The avoidant partner may reveal pieces of themselves that few others get to see. They may talk about their dreams, their fears, and their desire for a meaningful relationship. In those moments, you catch a glimpse of who they could be if they fully embraced intimacy of her, and that glimpse can become incredibly powerful and stir. Instead of evaluating the relationship based on what consistently happens, many people begin evaluating it based on what seems possible. They become attached to potential. They become invested in the future version of the relationship rather than the present reality of it. At first, this feels hopeful. You tell yourself they just need more time. You believe they are slowly opening up. You assume that if you remain patient enough, supportive enough, understanding enough, they will eventually become emotionally available. The problem is that hope can sometimes become a substitute for reality. When hope is grounded in evidence and action, it can be a powerful force for growth. But when hope becomes disconnected from reality, it transforms into something else entirely. It becomes a psychological trap. You stop paying attention to what is happening and start focusing on what might happen. You overlook patterns because you are focused on possibilities. You tolerate emotional inconsistency because you are invested in future change. You ignore your unmet needs because you believe a breakthrough is right around the corner. This is why relationships with avoidance can continue far longer than they should. The emotional investment is not tied solely to the present experience. It is tied to the imagined reward waiting in the future. The human mind is remarkably skilled at constructing narratives. We do not simply experience life. We interpret it. We create stories that give meaning to our experiences. In relationships, these stories often become more influential than reality itself. You begin telling yourself a story about who they really are beneath their defenses. You tell yourself that their distance is temporary. You tell yourself that their fear of intimacy will eventually disappear. You tell yourself that one day they will recognize your value and finally meet you at the level of connection you have been seeking. And because these stories are emotionally compelling, they become difficult to release. What makes the breakup so devastating is that it does not merely require you to let go of a person. It requires you to let go of the future you imagined with them. That future may have existed in your mind for months or even years. You pictured conversations that never happened, vacations that were never taken, milestones that were never reached, emotional closeness that was never fully achieved. In many cases, the fantasy becomes larger than the relationship itself. This explains why people often struggle when friends tell them to simply move on. Rationally, they know the relationship had significant problems. They understand that their needs were not consistently met. They recognize the emotional distance. Yet they remain attached because they are not holding on to reality. They are holding on to possibility. And possibility is difficult to grieve because it never fully existed. Philosophically, this reflects a deeper aspect of human nature. We are creatures of imagination. Our ability to envision a better future is one of our greatest strengths. It drives innovation, resilience, and personal growth. But in relationships, that same gift can sometimes become a source of suffering. We become attached not to what is, but to what could be. Healing requires a willingness to distinguish between those two realities. It means asking yourself a difficult but transformative question. Was I in love with who this person consistently showed themselves to be, or was I in love with who I believed they could become? That question often changes everything, because genuine love sees reality clearly. Fantasy depends on avoiding it. Genuine love accepts the whole person as they are today. Fantasy remains focused on who they might become tomorrow. The moment you stop grieving the potential and start accepting the reality, something remarkable happens. The emotional fog begins to lift. The confusion starts to fade. You no longer feel trapped between hope and disappointment. You begin to see the relationship for what it truly was rather than what you desperately wanted it to be. And that is where freedom begins, when you finally release the future that never existed and to make peace with the reality that always did. For Conjure. Once we begin to let go of the fantasy bond and see the fantasy bond more clearly, another profound realization emerges. The pain of losing an avoidant partner is often not entirely about the relationship itself. In many cases, the breakup acts as a trigger that awakens emotional wounds that have been dormant for years. What feels like heartbreak in the present moment is frequently connected to experiences that were never fully healed in the past. This is why people are sometimes shocked by the intensity of their own suffering mixes. They look at the relationship objectively and recognize that it was inconsistent. They acknowledge that their needs were often unmet. They understand that they spent much of their time feeling uncertain or emotionally deprived. Yet despite this awareness, the grief remains overwhelming. The question becomes why? The answer lies in understanding that human beings do not experience emotional pain in isolation. Every experience is filtered through the lens of previous experiences. We carry our history with us, whether we realize it or not. Every disappointment, every rejection, every unmet need leaves an imprint on the nervous system. When a significant relationship ends, especially one involving an avoidant partner, those old imprints can suddenly become activated. Imagine a person who grew up feeling emotionally unseen. Perhaps their caregivers provided food, shelter, and security, but struggled to offer emotional attunement. Maybe their feelings were dismissed, minimized, or ignored. Over time, that child unconsciously learned a painful lesson. My emotional needs are too much, or my needs do not matter. Years later, they enter a relationship with an avoidant partner. At first, everything feels different. There is excitement, connection, and hope. But eventually, the familiar pattern begins to emerge. Emotional distance appears. Communication becomes inconsistent. Vulnerability is met with withdrawal suddenly. The old wound is touched again. The pain is no longer coming solely from the present relationship. It is coming from every moment in life where emotional needs felt unseen or unmet. This is one reason heartbreak can feel so disproportionate to the actual circumstances. The mind believes it is grieving one loss, but the nervous system is responding to many losses at once. Psychologists sometimes describe this as emotional stacking. Present pain combines with unresolved pain from the past, creating an experience that feels much larger than the current situation alone would justify living. This also explains why some people become consumed by the breakup while others recover more quickly. The difference is not necessarily the depth of love. It is often the depth of the wound that has been activated. An avoidant relationship can become particularly powerful because it mirrors familiar, emotional dynamics. If someone spent their early years chasing approval, seeking validation, or trying to earn affection, they may unconsciously feel drawn toward relationships that recreate those same struggles. Not because they enjoy suffering, not because they want pain, but because the human psyche is constantly trying to resolve unfinished emotional business. There is a part of us that believes if we can finally succeed in a familiar painful situation, we will heal the original wound. We think that if this emotionally unavailable person finally chooses us, values us, or commits to us, the old feelings of inadequacy will disappear. But that rarely happens. Because no relationship can heal a wound that we refuse to acknowledge. The deeper healing begins when we stop focusing exclusively on the avoidant partner and start examining what their behavior awakened within us. Instead of asking, why can't I get over them? We begin asking, what part of me is hurting so deeply right now? That question shifts the entire machinery. It moves us from blame to self-discovery, from obsession to awareness, from chasing answers outside ourselves to uncovering truths within ourselves. Philosophically, this is one of life's most important lessons. Pain often arrives disguised as punishment, but in reality, it can be a teacher. Emotional suffering has a way of illuminating parts of ourselves that have been hidden in the shadows. It reveals fears we have avoided, beliefs we have inherited, and wounds we have carried for far too long. The breakup becomes more than an ending. It becomes an invitation to understand yourself more deeply, an invitation to challenge old narratives, an invitation to finally give attention to the parts of yourself that have been waiting for healing. The goal is not to erase the pain. The goal is to learn from it. Because when you understand the wound beneath the heartbreak, you stop treating the breakup as the source of your suffering and start recognizing it as the doorway to your growth. And the moment you heal the wound that kept you attached, you no longer need the person who accidentally revealed it time. If the previous stage of healing is about recognizing the wounds that were activated by the relationship, the next stage is about reclaiming the power that those wounds quietly took from you. This is where many people face one of the most difficult challenges of the entire recovery process. They realize that although the relationship has ended, a part of them is still emotionally tied to the avoidant partner. They continue thinking about them, checking for updates, imagining future conversations, or hoping for a message that will finally bring clarity. Even when they know the relationship was unhealthy, they still feel emotionally connected to it. This is often the result of what psychologists refer to as a trauma bond, a powerful attachment formed through cycles of emotional reward and emotional deprivation. The bond does not survive because the relationship was consistently loving. It survives because the inconsistency created an emotional dependency that feels difficult to break. One of the greatest misconceptions about healing is the belief that closure must come from the person who caused the pain. Many people spend months or even years waiting for an avoidant partner to explain their behavior, acknowledge the hurt they caused, or provide the answers that seem missing. They imagine that one perfect conversation will finally allow them to move on. But this belief keeps them emotionally trapped because it places their healing in someone else's hands. The reality is that if your peace depends on another person's actions, then your peace is not truly yours. As long as you are waiting for them to give you closure, you remain emotionally connected to them. This is where a fundamental shift must occur. Healing begins when you stop treating closure as something you receive and start treating it as something you create. Closure is not a gift another person hands you. It is a decision you make. It is the moment you accept that you may never get every answer, every apology, or every explanation you hoped for. It is the moment you stop negotiating with reality and begin accepting it. Acceptance does not mean approving of what happened. It does not mean pretending the relationship was fair or healthy. It simply means acknowledging what is true. The relationship ended. The person could not give you what you needed. The future you imagined is no longer available. Fighting these realities only prolongs the suffering. Another critical part of breaking the trauma bond involves rebuilding your sense of identity. During emotionally difficult relationships, people often lose touch with themselves. Their focus becomes centered on the other person's moods, behaviors, and availability. They spend so much energy trying to understand the avoidant partner that they gradually stop understanding themselves. Their happiness becomes dependent on receiving attention, validation, or reassurance. As a result, when the relationship ends, they do not just lose a partner. They lose a version of themselves that had become organized around the pursuit of that relationship. This is why recovery requires more than simply moving on from a person. It requires reconnecting with your own life. It means rediscovering passions, goals, friendships, and ambitions that may have been neglected. It means creating a future that is not built around being chosen by someone else. The more connected you become to your own purpose, the less power the past has over you. Emotional freedom is not achieved by forgetting the relationship. It is achieved by creating a life that becomes more compelling than the memories you keep revisiting. There is also an important shift in self-respect that must occur. Many people unknowingly measure their value by whether the avoidant partner wanted them. They interpret being chosen as proof of worth and being rejected as proof of inadequacy. But true self-respect emerges when you stop allowing another person's capacity for intimacy to determine your value. Self-respect means recognizing that your needs matter. It means understanding that consistency, communication, and emotional availability are not unreasonable expectations. They are healthy requirements for a fulfilling relationship. The moment you stop chasing people who cannot meet those needs, you begin honoring yourself in a completely different way. Philosophically, this is the transition from attachment to empowerment. Attachment says, I need this person in order to feel whole. Empowerment says, I am already whole, and any relationship I choose should add to my life rather than define it. That distinction changes everything. It transforms relationships from sources of survival into opportunities for connection. It allows love to become a choice rather than a necessity. The deepest healing occurs when you no longer need the avoidant person to return, apologize, or finally understand your value. Because by that point, you have already discovered your value for yourself. And when you stop seeking your worth in the hands of someone who could not hold it, you reclaim demand. By the time someone reaches this stage of the healing journey, a profound transformation has already begun. They have started to understand the addictive nature of the push-pull dynamic. They have recognized that the avoidant partner's withdrawal was not a measure of their worth. They have begun separating fantasy from reality, uncovering the deeper wounds beneath the heartbreak, and reclaiming the emotional power that was once invested in someone else's approval. But healing is not simply about recovering from a painful relationship. It is about becoming the kind of person who no longer repeats the same patterns. This is where the final stage begins. Not just getting over an avoidant, but building a more secure relationship with yourself and, eventually, with others. Many people assume that healing means reaching a point where they never think about the relationship again. That is not the real goal. The goal is to reach a place where the memory no longer controls your emotions, your decisions, or your sense of self. Healing is not the absence of memory. It is the absence of emotional captivity. One of the most important principles of secure attachment is learning to regulate your raw emotions from within, rather than depending on another person to regulate them for you. In unhealthy relationship dynamics, especially those involving avoidant partners, people often become emotionally reactive. Their mood rises when they receive attention and falls when that attention disappears. Their sense of security becomes tied to another person's behavior. As a result, they spend much of their emotional life responding to external circumstances rather than creating stability from within. Secure individuals operate differently. They still value connection, intimacy, and love, but they do not lose themselves when uncertainty appears. Their emotional foundation comes from self-trust. They know that regardless of what another person chooses to do, they will be able to handle it. This confidence is not arrogance. It is emotional resilience. It is the belief that your well-being does not depend entirely on someone else's presence. Developing this kind of security requires self-awareness. You must become curious about your own patterns. You must begin noticing what triggers fear, anxiety, or emotional dependency. Instead of automatically reacting to those feelings, you learn to observe them. You ask yourself difficult questions. Why am I afraid of being abandoned? Why do I feel compelled to chase someone who is unavailable? Why does uncertainty affect me so deeply? These questions are not designed to create self-criticism. They are designed to create understanding. Awareness is the first step toward change because patterns cannot be transformed until they are recognized. Another essential element of healing is learning to establish and maintain healthy boundaries. Many people who struggle in relationships with avoidance spend years ignoring their own needs. They tolerate inconsistency, make excuses for unhealthy behavior, and remain in situations that leave them emotionally exhausted. They do this because they fear losing the connection. But healthy boundaries require a different mindset. They require the willingness to prioritize your well-being, even when doing so risks disappointment. Boundaries are not walls that keep people out. They are standards that protect your emotional health. They communicate what you are willing to accept and what you are not. More importantly, they help you distinguish between genuine love and unhealthy attachment. A secure person does not stay in a relationship simply because they love someone. They also evaluate whether the relationship is capable of supporting mutual growth, respect, and emotional safety for us. As healing progresses, something remarkable begins to happen. The qualities that once attracted you start to change. Emotional unavailability becomes less appealing. Inconsistency becomes less exciting. The drama that once felt intoxicating begins to feel exhausting. Instead, you find yourself drawn toward stability, honesty, and emotional presence. What once seemed boring now feels peaceful. What once seemed ordinary now feels trustworthy. This shift is not accidental. It reflects a transformation in your attachment system. You are no longer seeking relationships that recreate old wounds. You are seeking relationships that support healing and growth. Philosophically, this is one of the most meaningful developments in a person's life. We often think of healing as returning to who we were before the pain. But true healing is something greater. It is becoming someone new because of the pain. It is allowing hardship to deepen your wisdom rather than harden your heart. It is using heartbreak as a catalyst for self-discovery rather than a reason to retreat from love. The ultimate goal is not to become someone who never experiences loss. The ultimate goal is to become someone who remains grounded in their own worth, regardless of what they lose. Because when your sense of value comes from within, relationships become expressions of your life, rather than the foundation of it. And that is the moment everything changes. You stop searching for someone to complete you and start building a